Matthew chapter 1. Well, because the framing story of the entire Bible is Abraham, and going forward, it's fitting that Matthew begins his nativity story with the genealogy of Jesus, again beginning with Abraham. So verse 2 through verse 6, you have 14 names going from Abraham to David, 14 more names that take you down to the captivity of Babylon, of course the worst moment in Israel's history. And then 14 more names take you up to verse 16, the birth of Jesus. So what we're doing here, what Matthew's doing, is establishing, of course, the Jewish identity of Jesus. He's part of the family line, and he is, very importantly, part of the Davidic line. The high point of Israel's history has been met in Jesus, would be how you'd see that. Well, we have the story then of where Joseph realizes his wife is pregnant. He wants to be honorable and not marry her, and so it takes an angel or an angelic visit or a dream. It could be Gabriel, we're not sure. He was certainly active in Luke 1. And he tells Joseph some very important things, of course, that cause Joseph to realize he's part of a great story here. Of course, the most famous is 121. His name will be Yeshua, for he will Yoshia, save his people from their sins. Of course, it's a play on words. Salvation is in that Hebrew term. So Jesus will save his people from their sins. Now, what does that refer to? Well, his people, we just talked about in this genealogy, his people. What are their sins that they'll be saved from? Well, the Jews know where their sins were. It was the cause of their exile, their deportation. Of course, the idolatry that was rampant in not only some people, of course, in this part here, but really it's really what causes the fall of Israel. And that takes so much of the Old Testament story. So this is the sins of the people of Israel that would be on the mind of the reader. He will save, so we're simply talking about reversing the idolatry that the people of Israel were guilty of. He will save his people from their sins. He'll bring them back from the idolatry that caused their downfall in the story and their captivity. Ezekiel 34, beginning in verse 6, to me is a good understanding of this storyline here. Think of how it went. My sheep, God said, wandered through all the mountains and on every high hill. Now that's a way of saying idolatry, because they would worship on these hills. Yes, my flock was scattered over the whole face of the earth, and no one was seeking or searching for them. For thus says the Lord God, indeed, I myself will search for my sheep and seek them out. So God says, I will do it, and that's the curiosity of the Old Testament story, is how will God, the eye of that story, search out his people? Well, let's listen. And I will deliver them from all the places where they were scattered on a cloudy and dark day. Therefore I will save my flock, and they shall no longer be a prey, and I will judge between sheep and sheep. I will establish one shepherd over them, and he shall feed them, my servant David. So we have, of course, David is long gone by this point in this story, even in Ezekiel's day, but he's saying that there is going to be a Davidic figure. A slot is going to be answered or filled in that fills in the role of David. He will feed them and be their shepherd. Thus they shall know that I, the Lord their God, am with them. So remember how in John 1 we have God, or Jesus, being with Yahweh. Now we have God being with his people through Jesus. And the house of Israel, my people, says the Lord God, you are my flock, the flock of my pasture. You are my people, and I am your God. This with them is reminiscent of Ahaz's promise in Isaiah 7:14, which caused Matthew in 121 to say this, or 122, this story fulfills the story of the virgin that would conceive and bear a son. Thou shalt call his name Emmanuel, that is God with us. So the story of God being with his people is reminiscent of Isaiah 7:14. So, in the person of Jesus, and this is how Matthew 1, I think, is filling all this out. In the person of Jesus, God will be with his people, and the nation would come back to loyalty to God. This here is what we're aiming for. Jesus was that shepherd who would gather his people and feed God's people.